Hey guys, this is Benny Ricciardi with rotocurve.com, and I'm here with our Benny's Bat section for today, Tuesday, July 21st. There's a lot of big tournaments sitting out in the lobbies tonight. Some that, the usual tournaments that we have every day, but some with a little bit of a higher prize pool today. We do have a full slate of 15 games, so as always, what we're going to do is we're going to break down each one of the pitchers, try to find what their weakness is, and then look at the bats on the other side to try to figure out which guys are in the best spot. What we want to do is try to find the guys who profile to do the best against that pitcher's weakness and see if we can fit as many of them as we can into our lineups. So let's get started. There's a lot of guys we got to talk about today. First guy up is Jason Vargas going up against Pittsburgh. Right-handed bats have hit a lot of home runs against him over the course of the last 3 years, and they've actually hit pretty well against him. He is in Kauffman Stadium for this one, though, which is not an easy park to hit home runs in, but there are a lot of guys on that Pittsburgh team that have good numbers against left-handed pitching. You got a guy like Francisco Cervelli, who has a 447 WOBA with a 233 ISO number. So he's always a cheap catching option that, we've been rolling with a lot the first half of the year, and he's been working out pretty well for us. Sterling Marte, 402 with a 279, 402 WOBA with a 279 ISO number. So he's a guy that's been hitting them for power as well as consistency. A guy like Kang, the shortstop, he's 380, 191. You got McCutcheon at 379, 155. So there's a lot of guys in this Pittsburgh team that can do well against Vargas. Vargas hasn't been pitching all that great this year, and I think this could be one of those sneaky spots where you could roll out a couple of these Pittsburgh bats, and you could see some big upside with them. Next guy I want to talk about is Jeremy Hellickson. Hellickson has been struggling with left-handed bats as well. He's allowed them to hit 307 against them with a 176 whip. He goes up against the Marlins today. So there are a couple left-handed bats on the Marlins you can look at. The guy who I like the best is actually Derek Dietrich. His numbers are really good this year against left-handed pitching. Against right-handed pitching as a left-handed bat. He's got a 407 WOBA with a 238 ISO number. Hit a home run last night, had a big score at a low price all over the industry. So he's another guy I think could be in play. I don't like the fact that they bat him in the sixth hole, but if he's moved up in the order, I think he's like an automatic play. But even in the sixth hole, if he's still as cheap as he was yesterday, I think he's a guy that you can use as a salary saver that has, that home run upside that you're looking for in a tournament, and also should be pretty safe. I mean, like I said, his WOBA number's pretty high, and he's got a pretty good matchup here today. Justin Bour is somebody who's been disappointing in these spots lately, but his numbers still point out that he's somebody you want to look at against weak right-handed pitching. He's got a 373 WOBA, a 242 ISO score. He has been erratic, but he does have power. He does have upside. So he might be another one of those cheap tournament plays that you look at because he's still cheap pretty much all over the place as well. You can look at guys like Christian Yelich, who's now batting in the 3-hole. His numbers this year aren't that great, but if you look back to his numbers last year, he is somebody who hits right-handed pitching pretty well. You have Ichiro, who's been leading off for them. He's another one of those left-handed bats you can look at. Again, Ichiro, if he's cheap, you can look at him, but he doesn't have a ton of upside at this stage in his career. And I actually saw him hit into a double play yesterday, which is something that, a young Ichiro almost never did. If he put the ball on the ground, he legged it out. He's not the same guy, so don't think you're going to get a lot of upside out of him. If he's real cheap and you need him to fit something in, maybe, but I don't think it's a great play, to be honest. Next guy I want to talk about, we got Carlos Rodon going up against St. Louis. Now, St. Louis really struggles with left-handed pitching, but we have to remember they were struggling with left-handed pitching when Matt Holliday was out of the lineup and before they really started giving Randall Gierchuk, more of a chance, to be honest. Gierchuk's a guy who has a 400 WOBA with a 242 ISO number against left-handed pitching. And Holliday's a guy who has a 363 WOBA this year, but over the course of his career, he's had a very good WOBA and ISO numbers against left-handed pitching as well. So now that you're putting both of those guys, and they'll probably both be pretty high up in the order. Gierchuk batted second yesterday or 2 days ago when they went up against a lefty last time. So I definitely think that, they're starting to take notice of the fact that this guy's hitting left-handed pitching pretty well. I think you're going to see both of those guys up towards the top of the order, and they're both in pretty good spots today. You got Matt Latos going up against Arizona. Latos has struggled with left-handed bats. 287 they're hitting against him with the 1.43 whip. A guy like David Peralta is probably in play, 376 WOBA number, 249 ISO. So he's got some power. He can definitely give you some pop. You got to look at his price, though, because his price has gotten expensive in some spots. And where it has gotten expensive, I don't think it's something that I really want to do. Where it's still cheap, though, I think you can definitely still fit him in your lineup. I think he's a pretty good option for you today. You got a guy like Vincent Velasquez is the next guy I want to talk about. He actually hasn't been bad in the innings that he's been up, but he has allowed a couple home runs to left-handed bats. The two guys that I'd be worried about on the Red Sox going up against them in a good hitter's park would be Alejandro De Aza. Now, he's a cheap option who's flying under the radar. His numbers are amazing so far this year against right-handed pitching. He's got a 407 WOBA with a 247 ISO number. And again, if you're looking at on sites, if you can find him cheap, he's definitely one of the best salary-saving options today. Houston's a good home run hitter's park. It's a good hitter's park, period. And he's going up against the rookie Velasquez. So I think he might be in a pretty good spot. The other guy you can look at anytime he goes up against right-handed pitching on Boston is David Ortiz. He's a 387 WOBA, 255 ISO guy. Big home run power. Definitely somebody that you want to consider or, at the very least have on your radar, especially if you can find him undervalued. He's a good guy for your cash games as well as for your tournament upside whenever he goes up against a right-hander in a good hitter's park. Next guy I want to talk about is Alex Wood. Wood has basically been pretty horrible this year. Right-handed bats are hitting 302 against them and have always hit better against them. But even left-handed bats are hitting 289 against them this year. Now, going up against the Dodgers, you got to figure they're going to go with their, right-handed platoon. That means you could see a guy like Kiki Hernandez up at top of the order. He's got a 451 WOBA with a 333 ISO this year. So those are like elite level numbers. I'm expecting regression. I don't think he's going to stay up there. Those numbers are just too good. But he does hit left-handed pitching pretty well. So he is somebody you have to look at, especially if they put him in the leadoff spot today. Scott Van Slyke, anytime Scott Van Slyke goes up against a lefty, anytime Scott Van Slyke goes up against a lefty, he's a guy that has to be in your lineup. Last year in like 100 at-bats, he had like 7 or 8 home runs against left-handed pitching. This year, he's got one of the higher WOBAs on the team, 421 WOBA, 229 ISO. So he's always been able to hit left-handed pitching well. Definitely something that you want to consider. Yasiel Puig is the other guy, 361 WOBA against the lefties with a 156 ISO. So he's another guy that you can look at as well. I would try to stay away from Justin Turner. Turner, even though he's right-handed, actually does better against right-handed pitching. But again, I think I'm not a big fan of Alex Wood. He's been hit around by both sides of the plate. And I definitely think he's somebody that you can stack against tonight. I don't think a lot of people are going to do it because he has a little bit of name recognition. And those Dodgers bats are usually pretty expensive. But again, if you can get a Dodgers stack pretty low owned in a bad hitter's park, I think that they have the chance to go off. And I don't think there's going to be a lot of other people that are on them. So they could be a sneaky stack to put in there for tonight. Let's see. The next guy we could talk about is Taijuan Walker. Walker's away from home where he hasn't pitched as well this year. He's much better when he's at home. On the road, he's kind of struggled a little bit. He's allowed 16 home runs this season and 100 innings pitched. So you might want to look at some of the big bats on Detroit. The two guys who do well against right-handed pitching, you got J.D. Martinez at a 392 WOBA. 392 WOBA and 295 ISO number. You also have Cespedes at a 370 and a 200. So those are the two guys that have some home run power and have actually been hitting pretty well against right-handed pitching. I don't love either one of them because their prices are high, but they're two guys that you can consider today. Now, there's a couple guys who I just want to mention. I didn't really go through them all that well because there isn't a lot of data on them. The Red Sox are starting a rookie, Brian Johnson, today against Houston. Now, we know Houston's a team that's a high strikeout team. This kid Johnson had a little bit over a strikeout per inning in the minors. His ERA was below 3. His whip was right around 1. So, I mean, he's a big pitching prospect, former first-round draft pick. I don't know if I want to target anybody on Houston against him. I'm kind of taking a wait-and-see approach with this kid. We've seen a lot of these young pitchers come up, and their first start or two, they've been pretty good because nobody's seen them. They don't have a book on them. So the first time through the order especially, you really don't know what kind of pitches they got and, how the breaks are and what to look for and what to sit on and, what they like to throw and what kind of counts, what pitches they're comfortable with. That comes after you get a little bit of a scouting report on these guys. So I think Johnson could actually pitch pretty well today. Like we said, if they let him go 6 or 7 innings, and he's been going that far in the minor leagues, he's striking out a guy per inning and he goes against a high strikeout team. But I don't know if I'd take any Houston bats against him today. Same thing goes with a guy like Joe Ross in Washington. Doesn't have a ton of innings under his belt, but he's been pretty good in the innings that he does have, going up against a Mets team that's been struggling today. So I didn't talk about any of the Mets. I don't really think I want to target against this guy. And Aaron Nola is the third guy for the Phillies. He's another rookie that's come up. After Kyle Schwarber was called up, somebody had tweeted out that he's now the #1 prospect in the minor league. So I guess he's getting his shot today as well. And he goes up against Tampa Bay, which isn't a particularly tough matchup either. So I hadn't mentioned any of the bats on those three teams. If somebody wants to take a chance and go up against one of these rookies, be my guest. Sometimes rookies blow up. Sometimes they have great first starts. But I just don't have enough information to tell you guys one way or another. Here's who you should target, or here's who you shouldn't target. But the next guy I do want to talk about, now that that's all out of the way, is Brett Anderson from the Dodgers. He's allowed .277 batting average with 9 home runs and 73 innings pitched to right-handed bats. There aren't a ton of right-handed bats on that Braves team that you want to look at, but Jose Uribe is somebody who's kind of going under the radar. He has a .433 WOBA and a .353 ISO number this year against left-handed pitching. So those are huge numbers. He usually hits about 5th in that Braves order, and he should be in a pretty good spot today against a guy who struggles against right-handed bats. You can look at a guy like Chris Johnson, but probably only for cash games. He's got a .360 WOBA, very high batting average over the last 3 years against left-handed pitching, but he doesn't hit for a lot of power, doesn't drive in a ton of runs, doesn't particularly do a whole lot other than just kind of hit singles, which there's a place for in baseball, but not really a place for in fantasy baseball, to be honest. The other guy you could look at is Cameron Maybin. He was hot before the break. He's hitting in that 2-hole for the Braves, another right-handed bat. His numbers aren't great this year against left-handed pitching, but he has always hit left-handed pitching better. So he's somebody else you can consider if his price is cheap. His price came up when he started getting hot before the break. I don't know if I'd be willing to pay up for him if there are other guys around him who are better players and make more sense and have better, just better track records. Next guy we can talk about is Nate Karns. Nate Karns has been pretty good this year, so there's not much I really want to take on this Phillies team. But the one guy I did want to mention is Cesar Hernandez. He was $2,600 yesterday, had 19 points. He was $2,600 the day before. He had 12 points. He's only $2,700 today. He's second base and shortstop eligible over on DraftKings. On some of the other sites, he's still pretty cheap too. On Aces, he's like $4,200. I think his price has actually come up a little bit over on FanDuel, but if it had come back down, I mean, he cooled off for about a 6 or 7 game stretch after he was getting double digits every game, but he's starting to heat up again. Like I said, he had 2 hits in each of the last 2 games. He had 12 and 19, and his price is just so cheap. And you can fit him in at second base or shortstop, which is usually a position that you struggle to get points out of. I think he's cash game safe today in a lefty-righty matchup against Karns. I think if he gets on base, there's a good chance he's going to try to steal. And if he does that, he gets you 10 points on DraftKings. He gets you 4 or 5 points on Aces. I mean, for a guy who's this cheap, that's great production for you. So you can use him in cash. You can use him for tournaments, definitely. He opens up the avenues for you to get that extra big batter, too, that you want in your order. And like I said, I tweet out all the time, hey, guys, Cesar Hernandez is still less than $3,000. And apparently nobody listens because yesterday he was only 8% owned, too. And, like I said, the guy just keeps making me money. So I want to make sure you guys are aware of him, or at the very least put him on your radar and check his game logs and see what he's been doing lately. The next guy I want to talk about, Mark Buehrle. Buehrle's a lefty. He's been pretty good so far this year for Toronto. He's in Oakland, which is another, it's basically a park upgrade for him. There are a couple bats on Oakland I think you can look at, though. Catcher position, you can look at a guy like Josh Phegley. He's got a .382 WOBA with a .240 ISO. So here's a guy that's got some power. He's been hitting pretty well. The only thing you got to worry a little bit about him is, how Oakland likes to pull those switches. So late in the game, if they take the lefty out and bring in some of those right-handed relievers, you may lose an at-bat late in the game with Phegley. But he's pretty cheap. I'm sure he was $3,100 the other day when he got to play on DraftKings. So I'm hoping he's still somewhere around there today. He's like 41 or 42 over on Aces. He was a little bit pricier, I think, over on FanDuel. I think he was up at like 2,800 or so. But even there, he hits very well against left-handed pitching, so he's somebody you can look at. The other guy is Billy Butler. Billy Butler's been pretty hot. He usually hits cleanup for that Oakland team. He has 2 home runs since the All-Star break. He hit one the other day against a left-hander. So I think he's another guy that you can look at for some upside in that game. Let's see what else we got here. We got, obviously, Kyle Kendrick going up against Coors. Hold on, I got to take a sip before I start talking about a Coors game. All right, we got Kyle Kendrick and Matt Harrison going up against each other in Coors Field. Everybody on Texas and Colorado is in play. Let's just make this easy. The guys who stick out, though, the guys who are the best spots, Prince Fielder's got a 4, or actually Kendrick has allowed left-handers to hit 301 with 9 home runs in 45 innings. He's allowed right-handers to hit 283 with 14 home runs in 57 innings. So like I said, any right-handed bat, any left-handed bat is pretty much in play in Coors Field against Kendrick. Prince Fielder's got a 418 WOBA with a 170 ISO number. You got Moreland with a 402 WOBA, 296 ISO number. Since Chu with a 357 WOBA, 201 ISO number. All 3 of those guys are in a really good spot against Kendrick. You could also roll out a guy like Adrian Beltre. He makes a lot of sense. You can take some of those guys up towards the top of the order. Let's see, like a Rognit Odor. He's somebody that you can throw into your roster. I mean, any of those guys make sense. There's going to be a lot of people stacking this game tonight, and there's going to be a lot of runs one way or another. On the other side, Matt Harrison, he made his first start of the season. I think people were expecting more out of him. His first start was a little bit rocky. Now, that's funny against the Rockies. But anyway, the one guy on the Rockies that really stands out for me today is Troy Tulowitzki. He's the best shortstop option by a mile. He's also the best Rocky against left-handed pitching. He's got a 432 WOBA number, a 221 ISO. Now, when you look at the Colorado team, he is literally the only guy on the team that has a WOBA over 320 or an ISO number over 200 against left-handed pitching. So I was expecting to have a lot of Rockies on my short list today. And he's really the only one that stands out. DJ LeMahieu is probably the second best guy, not so much for the power numbers, but he's got a decent WOBA. But again, 320 is his WOBA. He's the second highest on the team. So I was really expecting Colorado to kind of profile a little bit better against Matt Harrison. If I had to take one of the 2 teams in this game today, I think it would definitely be Texas. And again, I do like Tulo, though. So if you wanted to do some kind of crazy stack on DraftKings, and I don't even think it'll be that crazy, I think if you go with Texas and Tulo, you're going to get a lot of points out of this game in Coors Field today. Next guy we're going to look at is Shane Green. Now, Shane Green had a pretty good start to the season. His last 4 starts, he's been horrendous, though. He's only made it through 13 innings. He's given up 25 earned runs. He has a 349 batting average to left-handed bats with 4 home runs and 35 innings pitched. And right-handed bats are actually been hitting more home runs against him. They have 7 and 38 innings of work. So, I mean, he's been giving up home runs. He's been giving up high average to left-handed bats. He's been giving up a ton of runs lately. So you got to try to look at some of the bats against him. Again, if you look at the numbers for the Seattle team, nothing really pops out at you. Nelson Cruz is the one guy whose numbers kind of stand out, and he's around the 360 WOBA with a higher than normal ISO score. So, that's what you would expect from a home run hitting power hitter like him. But guys like Cano and Seager had such bad numbers because they had such a bad start to the year that they don't pop up on any screeners that you run. But I do think that you can use either or both of those guys today. Because like I said, Shane Green has been really, really bad. He's been letting left-handed bats hit almost 350 against them. He's been giving up a couple home runs, even though more to right-handed guys. And he's just been giving up a ton of runs. So I think you're going to have a lot of upside chance for using a guy like him. If they are able to chase him early, you're also going to get some of the weaker guys coming out of that Detroit bullpen who are also mostly right-handed. So I think you're going to get some good at-bats today from guys like Seager and Cano. I wouldn't go down any further, even if Brett Miller is leading off again and he's a left-hander. I wouldn't use him. He's just not that good. Cano and Seager at least have some kind of track record that you can hang your hat on. They would pretty much be the 2 left-handed bats that I put in my order from that Seattle team. Let's see. We got Raciel Iglesias from Cincinnati. He's another one that struggles with left-handed bats. They're hitting 354 against him with a whip that's over 2. Again, it's in a small sample size. He hasn't pitched a ton of innings in the league. But I definitely think that there are 2 guys on Chicago that you really, really got to consider today. And that's Anthony Rizzo, 394 WOBA, 263 ISO number. Obviously he hits right-handers and left-handers well. He has a real high on-base percentage. He walks a lot, doesn't K a bunch. Definitely think he's a good option today. Obviously, he's not going to be cheap anywhere. A guy who you can still find cheap, though, is Kyle Schwarber. Schwarber's got a 439 WOBA and a 231 ISO number. obviously in limited innings because they called him up for about a week earlier in the season, and then he went back down, and then they just called him back up from after the All-Star break, and he's been starting every game so far, and he's been hitting in every game so far. So I definitely think Schwarber is somebody who you definitely want to look at put in your lineup. He's catcher eligible on some sites. Other sites, I think he's first base and outfield. I can see catcher and outfield. I don't understand why they have him listed as a first baseman in places. But like on Fantasy Aces, he's pretty cheap as a catcher option, somebody you should put in there. DraftKings, I think he was like 3,300 or 3,200 yesterday. So if you can find this Schwarber guy that cheap as a catcher option, just plug him in. He's almost a plug and play for me today, especially if he's going to be batting in the 2-hole like he was yesterday. Let's see. We got Matt Garza going up today for Milwaukee against Cleveland. Garza's allowed left-handed bats to hit 299 with 8 home runs this year. So you got to look at a guy like Kipnis. Kipnis is somebody who should be in play. Let's see. You got Carlos Santana. Kipnis has a 426 WOBA, so that's why he's in play. He's hitting almost 400 his batting average against right-handed pitching this year. So you got to look at him. You're not going to get a ton of upside, though. He's not hitting a ton of home runs, a lot of doubles that he's been getting so far this year. Definitely one of my favorite cash game plays, but not somebody that I have in a lot of tournament rosters. But this is a good matchup for him today. The next guy is Carlos Santana. He's got a 356 WOBA, 232 ISO. So he's somebody else that you can look at against Garza. And Michael Brantley also has a 355 WOBA number, but his ISO number is not that high. He hasn't been hitting a ton of home runs this year, although he did have one the other day against a right-hander. So you do got to, start looking at him, because if you can catch him when he heats up, when he gets hot, he can put up some big numbers, as he did last year, where he went on a string of, double-digit games on DraftKings fantasy points, which was pretty nice. Let's see. You got Odrismir Despaigne going up for San Diego against San Francisco today. He usually struggles more with right-handed bats, about a 271 batting average this year, 7 home runs and 46 innings pitched. That game is in Petco, though, so I'm always a little weary of taking bats in Petco. But again, for a tournament, this could be a good option for you to stack up some of those San Francisco bats. They have a lot of guys who profile well against right-handed pitching. You got Posey at a 390 WOBA with a 182 ISO number. You got Brandon Belt at a 383 WOBA with a 226 ISO number. Panic and Duffy are both at about 368 with their WOBA. Panic is a 146 ISO number, and Duffy's a 169. You also have a guy like Hunter Pence, who's at about 350 with a 174 ISO. And remember, he's usually better than that. He just, was banged up earlier in the year and wasn't playing very well. So you can stack up all those guys that I just mentioned on San Francisco. That's pretty much like the top 5 or 6 guys in their order. And, they're in a good spot today against a guy like Despaigne. Like I said, the drawback of it is that game's in Petco, and you don't usually see a ton of runs scored in Petco. And if you're going to stack up a game, you want to stack up a game like Colorado, where you're expecting to see 10 or 11 runs with, 5 or 6 for each team, as opposed to a game that's likely to be like a, 4-2, 4-3 game, or even if San Francisco does hit well, maybe they get, 6-2, something like that. You're not going to get a ton of upside fantasy-wise if the final score is only 6-2. Let's see. You got a guy like Matt Schumacher also going up. He's allowed right-handed bats to hit 287 against him with 7 homers and 42 innings. And he's also allowed 10 home runs and 48 innings to left-handed bats. Now, the Twins don't have a lot of guys that profile well against right-handed pitching. Basically, the only guy that you can really look at is Brian Dozier. 361 WOBA, 268 ISO number. So he's legitimately the only bat on that team that I really want to even consider today against Schumacher. Even though Schumacher's had some struggles, I just, there's nothing that really stands out for me on that Twins team. Next guy is Nathan Eovaldi. Left-handed bats are hitting 350 against him this year. Right-handed bats are hitting 272. Lefties have a 1.90 whip against him this year. So there are definitely guys that you can target against him from both sides of the plate. Some of the guys that stand out against right-handed pitching. Right now, Jonathan Schoop is absolutely on fire for that Baltimore team. His WOBA's 512. His ISO's 462. He's been smashing home runs left and right. So this is definitely a guy that you have to put on your radar. His price has even jumped up. On DraftKings, I think he's up to like 4 or 4,500 because he has just been absolutely killing the ball lately, and everybody would have him in their roster if they left this guy at like 34 or 33 like he was a week or two ago. The other guy you can look at is Manny Machado. Machado's been great. 388 WOBA, 240 ISO. He's really coming into his own and becoming, basically a superstar in this league. Especially, I love the fact that he hits at the top of the order because it ensures him a maximum number of at-bats. And he's been doing damage with it. He's been going yard. He's been stealing bases. He's been getting hits. He's been scoring runs. You really can't ask for much more. Again, the problem with him, the price has gone sky high on him. So you really got to like him if you want to fit him into your roster, but he is one of my favorite third base options today, and I'm definitely going to have some exposure to this guy. Let's see. You could also look at a guy like Matt Wieters as a catcher. Wieters has a 342 WOBA with a 203 ISO number. The numbers don't just fly off the page, but for catchers where it's tough to find guys in good spots, Wieters is somebody who I think is in a good spot. He's going to be in the middle of that order, and definitely going to be somebody who I think you can use. So that pretty much rounds out our, our update for today. There's a couple pitchers up there up top who you can see I didn't mention because I'm not targeting many guys against them. I try to stay away from targeting guys against studs. Again, it's a tournament strategy that you can use because not a lot of people are going to be on them. So you are getting a lot of bang for your buck by doing something like that. But we like to talk a little more about guys that are in good spots or guys that you should be looking at for your cash games. And when you look at a guy who's, going up against like a Jacob deGrom, that's not really a good matchup by any stretch of the imagination. So we don't want to be taking too many bets against them. But the guys that we mentioned should give you a nice short list for you to start your research with today and hopefully wind up with the winning team. So thank you guys for joining us over here at RotoCurve. As always, my name is Benny Ricciardi. You can follow me on Twitter at BennyR11. Follow the RotoCurve site over at RotoCurve or come over to rotocurve.com. and sign up for an account and start earning your curve points now to trade in for money that you can use to play games on the sites. So thank you guys for joining us. And as always, stay classy, DFS.